I get into my third pitch and it goes pretty well, I feel like, and I kind of pause and wait for the, investor's reaction. He basically says, "This has got to be the worst idea I've ever heard. Not only are you going up against massive incumbents, they have ultimate distribution. There is no way you're going to compete against them." Before I could say anything, he hangs up. He just drops off the Zoom call. I kind of gave myself just a chance to internalize what he was saying, try to pull out some of the truth in that, which is, going into this market is going to be incredibly hard. We need to think about growth from the very beginning. And if we have any chance of succeeding, product growth, those need to be intertwined in our strategy.
Thank you for coming, Grant.
Thanks for having me.
You co-founded and are leading one of the most successful AI applications right now. You've crossed 100 million of ARR. You're approaching 100 million users. We are so stoked to talk to you about all of your recent product launches, expanding in the enterprise, and maybe taking a step back, just the process of building Gamma itself as a company. Maybe to just kick that off on that note, we'll rewind time and bring it back 5 years ago when you and your co-founders started Gamma in 2020.
Yep.
There's obviously been a ton of twists and turns since then, and it feels like we've been in maybe 3 macro cycles,
Totally.
2 technology cycles.
A lot has changed.
A lot has changed, exactly. Can you share a little bit more about what that process has been like and what were some of the big unlocks along the way?
Totally. It's always fun to kind of tell the initial sort of fundraising story because the world was just such a different place. We're, peak pandemic. This is the end of 2020 where most of, fundraising was just done over Zoom. So a lot of the investors I was trying to pitch early on, I never met in person. I was actually living in London at the time. So, different part of the world, trying to line up these pitches. I'd have to do so in the middle of the night. I also have 2 little kids. And so for me, it was, after kids go to sleep, we had a pretty modest flat. So I would kind of find a little corner. It was actually tucked between the kitchenette and the laundry room. Little space, put up a fake, Zoom background so nobody could tell where I was, and try to talk somewhat softly so that, don't wake up the kids. And so, starting the pitch, I was like, okay, first week, it was just lining back-to-back pitches. And the first day, I get into my third pitch and, it goes off it goes pretty well, I feel like, going through it 20 minutes in, feeling like, hey, this is not too bad. And I kind of pause and wait for the, investor's reaction. And he basically, says, "This has got to be the worst idea I've ever heard." And he said, "Not only are you going up against massive incumbents, they have ultimate distribution. There is no way you're going to compete against them." And so, in my head, I was like, well, that wasn't what I was expecting. And I got to think of a really good rebuttal. And before I could say anything, he hangs up. He just drops off the Zoom call. And so I'm like, wow, okay, this feeling of really this moment, you're kind of thinking in your head, what if he's right? What if he's right about all this? Maybe this is a dumb idea. And so you kind of have those doubts kind of creeping up into your head. I didn't really have much time to kind of get down on myself because I had to prep for the next pitch. And so in that moment, I kind of gave myself just a chance to internalize what he was saying, try to pull out some of the truth in that, which is, going into this market is going to be incredibly hard. We need to think about growth from the very beginning. And if we have any chance of succeeding, product growth, those need to be intertwined in our strategy. And so kind of took that to heart, even though it was painful to hear. And certainly maybe there could have been a kinder way to say those words. Still went back and eventually, fortunately we were able to raise money. 5 years in, we're making some good progress.
Wow. I'll say good progress.
Yeah. That's amazing. And it was pre-AI when you started Gamma, is that right?
Pre-AI, I think the spirit of what we want to do all along was to make it easy, effortless for anybody to create content. So the nature of being fast and, the speed aspect was always there. But AI happened to be a great gift a few years into the journey that really just expedited the entire process there.
Yeah. One of the things I've been curious about, because 100 million users is a lot of users, and some of them might know and love AI tools and some of them might not.
Yep.
as AI has evolved, how do you think about how much AI you expose in the product? Like even giving users the choice to pick their own image model, like how easy or complex do you make that?
Totally. Yeah. And it's a moving target. You know, when I was at Stanford, I was lucky enough to have a mentor, David Kelly, who was the founder of IDEO. And his story, you know, early on, he was, they invented the first Apple mouse, right? And so like at the time, like, you know, Xerox already had a mouse. It was a 3-button mouse. Very, very expensive, wasn't built for mass consumption. And so, you know, for someone that's super technical, they knew how to navigate. Kind of sounds silly now, even, you know, 3 buttons, kind of, you know, intimidating. And so his approach, David Kelly's approach, was always, you need to be super empathetic for where users are. And so they actually invented, you know, the 1-button mouse. Super easy. Anybody can click 1 button. And I think it's going to change over time. So I think we're right now maybe in the 1-button era of like AI, where the vast majority of people, like, they're still trying to figure out how do we even use this thing.
Yeah.
It's powerful, but intimidating. And so we need to recognize that. I think it's easy to kind of throw shade at, oh, you know, a chat prompt box is not the ultimate form factor. That may or may not be true, but chat is also very accessible and familiar. And so I think we're trying to navigate that ourselves. Like, what is the right entry point? A lot of it is spending time observing users, how they use Gamma, and then seeing where they just run into a wall or fall really short of expectations and try to fix things along the way.
Yeah. I think one thing that surprised us in a sense was just how, not only how hard it is to get AI presentations right, but also how different the products are on the market.
Yeah.
Olivia and I have literally tried 20 plus players out there, and the results are night and day.
Yeah.
Can you share more about what is so hard about it and what you guys got right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, there's been multiple attempts just, you know, throughout the past decade, even pre-AI, right? Like, there's a graveyard of, you know, presentation tools out there. I think, you know, the ones that are pre-AI kind of got stuck in a different trap, which is they tried to be, you know, incrementally better slideware. So they still do the 16:9 thing, and you still have like this sort of canvas where you as the end user have to figure out, you know, the layouts, the layers, you know, resizing things. And for, you know, the average person, you know, even if you're kind of 10x better on one dimension, PowerPoint's had 40 years to add every single piece of functionality possible. And so how do you ultimately compete? And of course, yeah, they do have distribution. And so it becomes pretty hard. I think for us, like early on, we knew that to compete in this category, you know, the saying is it's better to be different than better, right? Like it's better to be different than better. And so for us, we wanted to be fundamentally different. What are the different, you know, set of primitives or building blocks that aren't 16:9 slides that allows the average person that doesn't have design skills, that doesn't have design resources to be able to create content super fast. So that was kind of the initial differentiation. I think today there's almost a separate trap, which is being an AI native startup, you can lean a lot on just the AI models and assume they're going to get better and better, which they will. But then that almost becomes a crutch because you're trying to anticipate, well, I don't want to sort of, you know, create something that the model is going to disrupt, you know, everything I've created. And so you're not really willing to understand, okay, how do I create something in between that gives people a starting point that still has human in the loop? And it's pretty challenging. I think for us, we were sort of lucky in the timing in that we started pre-AI. We had a thesis around what building blocks would be important. And then we married that with AI along the way so that we kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think maybe just to pull on that thread a little bit, you know, hey, we're coming up against Microsoft, Google, the biggest tech juggernauts in the world. But on the flip side, right, you know, you might hear from others that, hey, is this just going to be solved by the frontier models?
Totally.
As the models get better, you can one-shot a great AI presentation. Talk more about why that reality is also maybe one that you're not afraid of. And you know, beyond sort of a single model itself, like what kind of value Gamma is adding on top?
Yeah, I mean, the way we see it is, you know, for certain tasks, maybe a generalist approach or like, you know, a super app can probably do a lot of these things. And for one-off presentations, that might be actually a viable, you know, solution for that case. I think for any time where the job to be done is really core to, you know, what the end user is trying to do. So in this case, like visual communication, business communication, visual storytelling, there's a lot that happens to make that feel right, right? And you as a creator need to feel like you have a lot of input. You want to be involved in that because it is your story you're telling. It's not the AI AI story. And so when you start going really, really deep into what it means to be, a great visual storytelling tool, like that job to be done, there's a lot of different workflows. For us, even orchestrating all the different models, whether it's, on the text side, image side, video, audio, there's a lot going on there. And so how do you package that all up so that, it feels good for the end user to be able to still, play with this, edit, manipulate, all those things. And we just think that, that requires a really specific tool to be able to do that. Even as you think about the evolution of that for us is like to go from single player mode to multiplayer mode, the ability to collaborate, have a shared workspace, have like a central repository of things that you're pulling into content. Those are also difficult problems to solve, and certainly you can do it. But for a super app to do that, it's like then you're starting to tease away, you're starting to pull away from what maybe their long-term aspiration is. Like they do want to be the all-purpose app. And that means they have to sacrifice a lot of these sort of granular point solutions that may not fit with their long-term vision.
Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of what's magical, or at least some of what's magical about Gamma, comes from AI. Like the new Agentic 3.0 launch is amazing, and the editing capabilities there. And then some of it just seems to be new insights that your team had around how presentations and communications should work. Like what was the process that led you to doing that differently?
Yeah, so part of this was, when we first started Gamma, this inception idea, or like how we came about the initial idea was, I was working at a different startup before we were acquired, and I went back into my roots, which is consulting. I was advising early stage startups, and what I was using to sort of create presentations was, Google Slides. So I'd go in, really one of the moments was like late at night, trying to prepare for a meeting the next day, and just feeling like I was spending all this time trying to format the deck to look decent so that it didn't look like I didn't do any work.
Yeah.
I had this moment feeling like, there's got to be a better way. This feels so backwards. Like, why am I spending 90% of the time on the formatting and 10% of the time on the content? And so when we kind of took a step back just to think about, okay, again, PowerPoint invented almost 40 years ago. What has changed? What are some of the things that we can sort of anticipate continue to change? One is, the way we share information obviously changed. Peak pandemic, of course, so much work shifted to virtual or over Zoom. And so, what if instead of having content that was, static 16:9, it was much more malleable? It could be something that could be mobile responsive by default. So if I shared something with you, you open on your phone, you could scroll through it just like you would, a website. And that same content can kind of flow naturally there. We also thought, why instead of just having, most presentations, just text and images, what if it could be more multimedia rich? So you could literally embed an entire website into what you're presenting because, that's a way for you to have much more richness in what you're actually trying to showcase. And then, of course, like rather than, a standard slide deck where I'm saying, hey, next slide, please, and clicking on it, what if it could be interactive? What if it could be something where everything you click on, it can actually open up? Just like the principles that we've embraced with web, like, the whole notion of, progressive disclosure, like that should apply to presentations as well. As I can either, if you're reading it async, you can choose your own adventure, or if I'm presenting it to you, I can be the storyteller and actually guide you through this. And we felt like those are all things that, seem obvious, or maybe we've already taken for granted on the website, side of creation. And why not be able to offer that same set of things for the average person that, again, doesn't have design skills, doesn't have technical resources, maybe doesn't know how to code, and just empower them to do way more than they could otherwise.
What do you see? I mean, I love this evolution of what's been unlocked on Gamma. And if you think about what's next, even we're seeing interesting things being done with avatars, often in a sales context. It's still very early innings, but how do you think about what's most interesting and what's kind of coming up next for Gamma?
Totally, yeah. One of the things we try to focus on are universal pain points. So when it comes to just even the foundation for Gamma, a lot of the insight was, we're all visual learners, but very few of us are visual designers by background, right? And so how can we empower people to be good visual storytellers? I think within this sort of space, there's another skill set that a lot of people have fear about, which is presenting. And they're not maybe super confident going up into a room and being able to articulate their thoughts. And I feel like that's like a huge, if people can't do that well, then that just means their ideas never make it to, into the world.
Yeah,
and I feel like that's that's really a disappointing outcome if that's the case. And so, of course, the whole notion of maybe AI avatars or like a presentation that can speak or have articulate your thoughts on your behalf using your voice. I think those are all super exciting explorations because again, it goes back to some of these universal pain points or like things that people aren't inherently great at that we can help assist them along the way.
The presentation is kind of like a final unit of output is downstream of like a lot of work and also a lot of thinking usually if it's a good presentation.
Totally. Yeah.
How do you think about how far Gamma goes in the pre-presentation space? Like how much do you do to help users get from like the initial grain of an idea into like a pretty clear articulation of a thesis?
Yeah, it's a great question. For us, we want to be end to end, right? The moment someone has some inkling of an idea that they want to share, we want to be there for them to help structure that, help really maybe even create that initial, narrative or story arc. And then the moment they want to create that first draft, we want to be there to help them create that outline and be able to actually put something where you're putting some shape around it. And then when you do want a design partner to help you edit and like really refine the thinking, we want, that our agent to be able to review everything you've already created and offer suggestions, maybe even make the design changes for you. And then of course, the moment you're actually sharing it and presenting to others, we want you to have a feedback loop. Like what are people engaging with? Like what content actually resonates? What are people getting stuck on so that you can go back and refine the entire process? And so, we do hope, today, I think we do decently well sort of in the middle. You have maybe the initial first draft done. You have some of the editing capabilities. I do think we have an opportunity to really close the loop entirely. And to your point, even like the very, very first part of the journey, I think there's a ton more we could do there.
Yeah, totally. And I know Olivia touched on the Gamma 3.0 launch, which was a few weeks ago now. Very exciting launch, very successful. And within that, you had agent, teams, API. There's a lot coming out in one day. Big launch day. And I think when we use agent, it feels like having a design partner alongside you. I'm curious, I know it's early days, but how has it changed the way your users interact with Gamma for the ones that have tried it at least?
Yeah, totally. I'll maybe quickly just share one perspective, which is, I think, we launched 3.0. I think it's helpful just to think about like, what is the difference between like a 1.0, 2.0, and a 3.0 launch? For me, like the 1.0 launch is all about really going after the true sort of innovators or the people that are really willing to like try whatever's out there. They love the new things, right?
Yep.
And you can call them AI tourists, but they're basically going out there because they love playing around, testing all these tools. Many of them may not stick around, and I think that's okay, but you're starting to get some of this initial energy around like what's interesting, what's not, what's actually useful. And of course, you have then to go back and actually continue to improve upon the product. When you get to your 2.0 launch, you finally have a chance to kind of win over what you consider as like the early adopters, people that still are, willing to kind of put up with a lot of gaps or deficiencies in your product. But for the first time, they're starting to pull product out of you. They have a whole long list of like feature requests. They see it kind of working for certain use cases. And that's great. Like you take that feedback back and you start, actually fleshing out your roadmap even further. And then you finally get to your 3.0 launch, which I think is like, if you were to map it to crossing the chasm, like you're for the first time trying to hit the mass market. You have a chance to have a product that can actually be used and be relied on and people can trust it. And I think that's where we're at today. And so for us, there's a few different things, we're releasing. One is just this notion that we can actually serve businesses of all sizes now, right? I think we're going from the sort of single player to multiplayer mode, going from just being a prosumer tool to being a business application. And I think we've had to earn the right to be able to do so. And, I think that just, there's a ton more that, for a business use case where everything from, even your terms of service to security, privacy to, can I actually collaborate in real time with my colleagues and coworkers? These are all pretty, meaningful, constraints for us to actually build, deliver on. And so we've worked a lot to actually be able to, fulfill on that. And as part of that, we're also kind of expanding the aperture of what Gamma even represents. We're also, releasing an API business where I do think for the first time, in addition to just serving end users, we can serve businesses and developers that want to build on top of Gamma. So for us, it's just like an exciting moment in time where I think for a business that has, up until now been pretty straightforward, like pretty, easy to understand, I think we'll be able to add sort of complexity in the sense that like we're going to have many different ways we can serve many different types of users.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to actually touch on the API piece of it because I feel like whenever there's the word agent thrown in, that gets all the attention. But actually, this harkens back to a CRO dinner that we had where a lot of CROs talked about using Gamma for sales decks.
Right.
And if you think about the ability to connect your data stores, maybe it's a CRM, et cetera,
Right.
to communicating what's in them and sort of the ideas and getting that to action, that's a very, very powerful concept. What are some examples of loops like that you've seen among your users and sort of inspired the API product?
Yeah, totally. So a lot of the early requests were, just building on the foundation of our prosumer user base. Prosumers, many of them are already using, tools like Zapier, Make, and now we can connect, the tools they're already using. So let's say you're using Granola for, all of your notes. You're meeting, if you're someone that uses Gamma, let's say you're using it as a way to communicate to your clients and partners, and you're sitting with the client. The moment the meeting's over, you can feed everything from Granola into basically creating a beautiful presentation that recaps all of the discussion topics, recaps all of the action items, the deliverables, and all the next steps, right? And so as soon as the meeting's is over, in their inbox, the client has that beautiful presentation, the beautiful PDF, and they know exactly, basically, what happened during the meeting and what was agreed upon. And they feel good because they feel like you listened and are able to really fulfill being a good partner for them. On the sort of, go-to-market side, we see, to your point, being able to integrate with CRM or, in some cases, people are using, sales intelligence tools like Endgame, where, a lot of that information is there that can be pulled into a presentation. So if you want to personalize, a market research or like a customer research deck for a specific client or customer, you can also do that on a super automated basis. And we think that's going to be super powerful. And then I think on the B2B side, there's actually two different use cases that we're super excited about. One is like being able to partner with someone like Glean, who sits on top of company knowledge, first-party data, where internally, we can be their visual storytelling layer. So you have to prepare for a QBR or a strategy session, pull all the information you already have and create that deck so everybody can be on the same page. We think that's going to be also just like, who wants to spend time formatting the PowerPoint when you can just have that automatically created in Gamma. Yeah. And then I think on the developer side, this is where we're already starting to talk to, folks like someone building a real estate app. They want their end users to be able to, when they go into their product and search a specific zip code or region, they want to be able to give their users, a directory or listing of all the available homes in that market. And they can have now a beautiful branded PDF sent to that end user, and they don't want to have to build that, right? We can be their content infrastructure in a way that's very complementary to their actual real estate app and provide them sort of, the under the hood, all this sort of goodness that, again, they can have this, now this content engine running for them, all built on top of Gamma. And as Gamma gets better, even on the prosumer side, that product gets better, everything else gets better too, right? The API becomes more powerful, more effective, and it can then serve even more use cases.
It's amazing. Hearing you walk through like the 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 launch, your team has always been incredibly, I think, clear and intuitive product builders. But I'm sure with tens and now in the hundreds of millions of users, you get a lot of requests. Like, how do you think about what do you build that people are clamoring for? What do you not build? Like, how do you make those trade-offs?
Yeah, it's definitely becoming increasingly hard. So it's always balancing your sort of own intuition for where you think there's big gaps or opportunities in the market. We also have just many different sources where we try to, obviously try to just have a good pulse and then try to consolidate all that. So one is like we have a public canny board where anybody can submit feature ideas, requests, people can upvote. We have for our power users a separate sort of Slack group. We call it the Gambassador program. So we throw them all there, and it's a great place for me to get real-time feedback because oftentimes we're kind of showcasing early concepts, wireframes, whatever it may be, and saying, hey, is this even like, is this completely missing the mark or is there something interesting here? And so you get some really critical and honest feedback from there. And then we're extreme like dog fooders of our own product. And so, every week we have something called Gamma-Rama where anybody at the company can create a fun presentation on any topic, like educate us on something. It could be a hobby. It could be something you really believe in. And at the end of every Gamma-Rama, you talk about all the sort of pain points you have, all the shortcomings of the product. So, all to say is like multiple different sort of inputs into that. And then we try on a very regular basis to kind of stack rank what we think is going to be most important and try to push that onto the roadmap.
I actually want to switch gears a little bit to growth itself. And the crazy thing about approaching 100 million users is not only the sheer number, but the fact that you've done so predominantly through organic channels.
Yeah.
And so we'd love I'm sure a lot of folks out there listening would be interested in how the heck did you guys do that?
Yeah.
What channels have been the most effective for you? And I do have to throw in there, I don't know if you're going to say this channel, but I've been very impressed by your Instagram content. I'm a millennial and I'm on Instagram all the time, and I engage with your content. And occasionally when I go to like it, I'll notice it has 80,000 likes already. And so very curious how this ballooned, expanded, and how you guys bring the community into the effort.
Totally. I mean, I'll start by just, my piece of advice for most early stage founders, as they're approaching or maybe, getting the product market fit, the number one thing I always advise them to focus on is word of mouth. Like, you have to build a product that has strong word of mouth. Everything else becomes so much easier when that's the case. And don't fool yourself into thinking of product market fit until you have strong word of mouth. And so we really did try to get that right in the very beginning. We had a few different sort of launch moments early on where, we launched on Product Hunt and we had ended up winning, product of the day, product of the week, product of the month, and it felt good. And then we looked at the signups, and initially you see this huge spike in signups, and then they sort of plateau out. And we're still bringing in new users, but it was very clear we didn't have strong organic virality. Like, something wasn't working on the sort of fundamental level. And so we had to go back and say, okay, we at that point in time, we could have said, okay, maybe let's just throw much more money at top of the funnel, like advertise a whole bunch, like run massive influencer campaigns. And I think we would have fooled ourselves into thinking, we could just continue to grow and that would be fine. We'll just spend our way out of the problem. But I think we gave ourselves an honest look. It's like, no, that the core growth engine is broken. So before we do any of that, let's make sure we do have strong word of mouth. So we ended up spending, 3 to 4 months leading up to our first AI launch. The entire team just focused on one thing. We are going to nail the first 30 seconds of the product experience. We're going to make sure that every new user coming in has the sort of a chance of like seeing the aha moment, such that they will go on and, tell their friends, colleagues, family about this product. And I think the moment we launched, all of a sudden you see, what took us basically 8 months to get to 60,000 signups, within a few days, we surpassed that. And then we'd have 25,000 signups a day, 45,000 signups a day, 50,000 signups a day. It just kept on going up, right? And we weren't doing any advertising. We weren't doing any marketing. And it was just all organic pull of people were using the product, telling others about it, sharing it with others. And that's where we felt like, okay, we're on a path where if we can just continue doing that, everything else is amplification on top of that. Yeah. You as a founding team then can actually say, okay, where might we augment and actually accelerate the growth? And I think doing so before that would have been premature, but doing that at the moment, then you have more of this massive tailwind to support you and everything else. Yeah. So that's fundamental, do that. And then I think there's many apps out there today that are, very much more prosumer in nature. And so you have, this, a growing base of users. It's oftentimes hard for a founder because you go from this point where every user to the user base being the sort of faceless entity, yeah. Who is even my user? Right. I don't know. And so, I think a lot of your audience is probably familiar with, founder-led sales as an important concept. If you're selling B2B, you probably need to do that. You need to be the first person to kind of know how to tell the story of your product, be able to then eventually train and onboard your AEs. I think in this era, it's really important to have founder-led marketing. How do you tell your story broadly in a way that is compelling, a way that really kind of understands the product and why it matters in the world, and in this case, be so close to everything that is it's part of the brand building. You have to be laser focused on that in the beginning, and I think again then everything else becomes a little bit easier.
Sometimes for products that are as horizontal as Gamma is, monetization can get in the way of growth if you're not very careful about how you design pricing. And a lot of your users are maybe students or other people who eventually might pay, but they might use Gamma for months or years without paying. How do you think about where you put the paywall and how you design the pricing? Yeah,
I mean, this is one where it's definitely, probably more art than science at this point. And so the way we approached it was, when we ended up doing our first big AI launch, signups were going, through the roof. We hadn't built any, so all hands on deck on building the first, 30 seconds. We had zero effort on the monetization piece. So we actually couldn't even charge people for the product.
Wow.
And intercom was blowing up with people saying, I ran out of credits, and like, how do I purchase more? And it was a very fair question. We didn't have a good answer for that. We're like, okay, yeah, I guess we need to go figure out pricing. So we ended up spending, all of April, basically running some initial pricing studies. We did, classic sort of Van Westendorp. We looked broadly at like what was, how other products were pricing. And I think, amongst like all these different data points, the conclusion ended up being like part of this is just, in this moment in time, everyone's familiar with ChatGPT's pricing and they're kind of already anchored on that. And so you can kind of get very sophisticated in how you want to price it, but that adds a lot of friction into like how people want to purchase a product. And so we ultimately landed something similar to kind of how ChatGPT was pricing initially, just as we thought as a good starting point. Let's just at least allow people to purchase Gamma. And then we wanted to then see the data, right? Is this a model that was actually economical for us? Could we make money with that price point? And fortunately for us, we went from a point where, our AI launch was really kind of this sort of bet the company moment, because we were about 12 months of runway, which, as a startup is not a great place to be especially if there's uncertainty ahead. And so the moment we launched pricing and packaging, it took us about 3 months to get to like 1 million ARR and then become profitable. So it was, for us, it felt like, okay, well, we don't need to change much because at least we know the core, unit economics work, at least at this stage, and we're going to continue to monitor it. And then we'll focus more on the product. I think if we had launched and like, things were working, but we're actually burning a lot of cash and like that 12-month runway is actually going down even faster, then we definitely would have had to revisit that decision. Fortunately for us, that wasn't one we had to do early on. And we actually really haven't touched pricing in, 2+ years. More recently, we introduced a few new plans, but fundamentally, the initial kind of design more or less has been the same.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I love what you were saying about growth. It reminds me, I think you had this quote in an interview recently where you said strategy is building a business on a product people love.
Yeah.
Just the simplicity and clarity of that was, I think very, very eye-opening, actually, because you can really boil it down to that. Maybe just to this point on starting consumer prosumer, we talked about launching the Teams plan. Curious how you think about crossing the chasm to the enterprise and B2B users more generally. It feels like there's probably been a lot of pull already just because some of your users use you for personal reasons and then they bring you into work.
Right.
But maybe talk more about that. And how did you decide on the timing of when to launch this plan and, when the time was right?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we think a lot about, sequencing, like set yourself up for success if you can. And that's where prosumer first is in our minds, kind of, where you want to start for a product like ours. You want to build a lot of bottoms up love before you even attempt like the B2B, emotion or like that sales process. I see a lot of startups try to do both simultaneously. I do think that's tricky. Some categories, maybe you can execute on that. But if you can start with the prosumer side and build that sort of bottoms up love, like people recognize the brand, they learn to trust the brand. And then when you're finally actually selling into a company, there's already some like internal champions that want you to win. Yep. That's always way easier. And like the moment we started feeling that was the moment where it was like, okay, we feel like we can actually start this process and going into this sort of B2B motion where there's already some tailwinds, right? We have some momentum. We're not like a cold start. Like, we're not just going into this completely cold. And so that was the sort of early signals we were looking for. And then we didn't want to rush into it. So like, then you spend a lot of time talking to those users, like what are their main points of friction? This is where we started recognizing that this might be just unique into this moment in time, but the sort of for many businesses, they're looking for ways to unlock AI productivity for their companies, right? What are tools that go beyond just ChatGPT that everybody at the company can use, that can familiarize themselves with like the power of AI, where other employees can train other employees, and it just so happens like slides is one of the formats where like almost everybody at the company is using on a very regular basis. And so now we're having the conversation where not only is there the bottoms up love, there's a top down like demand for, we need something tomorrow to help, really, educate our broad employee base. And I think those two together, hopefully will make it just easier for us to kind of, enter that market in a way where it doesn't feel like just pushing this massive boulder up a hill.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in what you said about the kind of bottoms up user love, because I think that's something every company aspires to, but you can't, manufacture it. It just happens.
Right.
To what extent has that been like a compounding advantage for you? Like, are there any flywheels that kind of get going as you get users in the tens of millions?
Totally. Yeah. I think, oftentimes startups get asked, like, what does defensibility mean or durability? And I think there's, many ways for a startup to build, defensibility. There's some form of network effects that happens. And then there's certainly like brand as a moat. On the network effect side, we don't have any, I would say, when it comes to like true direct network effects, so not like a social platform, but we do have this sort of local network effect that happens where if you do have that bottoms up love, what happens is you have users that are teaching other users how to use Gamma, right? So every incremental user, there's almost a social proof aspect of it. And what ends up happening is you become a standard. You become a language that everybody internally wants to learn. And that becomes a very powerful thing. I think similar things happen with, tools like Cursor, where like you become the standard and it's like, okay, yeah, no brainer. We're just going to use Cursor, right? And so I think you only earn that by having some of that bottoms up love. And then of course, going back to the brand piece of it, if you are top of mind for a category, when anytime anybody says AI presentations and all they can think of is Gamma, that's a great, obviously a great place to be for us. And so for us, we want to be that. You can only earn that by, of course, like building that brand awareness over and over again and being invested in doing so over a long time horizon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to the point on collaboration, you wouldn't necessarily call this a network effect, but the fact that you can share Gammas so easily is a huge advantage. I know we share Gammas internally all the time, but it reminds me a bit of Figma and how, they sort of replaced email over time in terms of sending that PDF format.
Yeah. I mean, when we're just getting started, we basically just had two mantras: make it dead simple to create, dead simple to share. Like if you do that, you complete the flywheel. And so, we wanted to make sure that was the case from the very beginning. You build for that organic virality by design and make sure, like, obviously you have to improve everything, but that needs to be fundamental to how you approach it.
Yeah. Love that. And actually, that's probably a good segue into company building overall. And there's a lot of lore around Gamma in terms of just how you've built this company a bit differently, especially given the fact that you started in 2020. A lot of companies in 2020 and 2021 were built very differently. Oftentimes they got bloated pretty early on, which I think is pretty antithetical to how you and John and James built Gamma. Can you say more about these kind of principles you had in the early days? It sounded, you shared a little bit on the product side, but the culture of Gamma was also very important, distinct. I've heard you talk about having this live culture deck. Say more about like how you guys came up with that. What's in that culture deck today, to the extent you can share?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, a couple of principles that I think, we've tried to stay true to. We had this internal mantra around hire painfully slowly from the very beginning. And even as we hit, a lot of growth, we still have to stay true to that. So it's allowed us to maintain relatively lean given our traction. But I think most importantly, when we first started, we thought about the initial core team. There was 7 or 8 of us actually that all came from Optimizely. And we had worked together for, 5+ years. And for us, there was already the sort of foundation of trust. But what we really thought about was we wanted that initial, 7 of us, we thought of that as like our MVP crew. We needed that group to be everything we needed to ship a product end to end. So we can create the product. We can also, market the product. And then for me, be able to even sell the product. Like that initial 7, that we wanted that to be there so that we would be able to move incredibly fast. So what did that look like in practice? Me as one of the co-founders, John, CPO co-founder, James, CTO co-founder. Then our first hire was our head of design, product design. Our next hire was our first front-end engineer. And then we hired 2 back-end engineers. And so again, going back to like, this is the MVP crew that could build end to end. And we could test a lot of different ideas along the way and allowed us to move incredibly fast in that first year. We didn't have to, wait for the next hire to come aboard. Like we had everything we needed. And I think that sort of foundation, getting that first 7 right, allowed us to have this core DNA where I could easily imagine hiring the next 7 or next 10 and just trying to replicate that DNA. I think Brian Chesky talks about this where like you really want to get that first 10 right or, first 100 right, because what you're trying to do is like set the blueprint for the next set of folks that join so that they all share the same values, same principles, hopefully the same level of ambition for what you want to build. And then everything becomes easier, right? Like if you know that team is all in it together, team full of hopefully missionaries that anything is possible. And so for us, getting that first 7 right was really, really critical. And then even after that, like having this notion of hiring painfully slowly, just allowed us to always focus on the quality of the people we're bringing in and not the quantity. Sometimes when you hit, product market fit, there's this temptation to just set these really ambitious hiring targets. And when you set the hiring targets, the hiring target becomes the goal. And the goal is to hit that target. Right. The target is no longer to hire the best people. And so we've always wanted to know, like, yeah, we need to grow. We need to continue to build a team, but we're never going to lower the bar for who we let in, into the door at Gamma. And so that's always been, top of mind. We've met many candidates that are maybe strong super technically or maybe good culturally, a good fit. But then weren't both. And if they're not both, then they're not someone that we're going to, work with at Gamma. And it becomes hard because again, the temptation always is, hey, we have to keep growing. You're on this growth flywheel. You can't hit those without hitting the hiring target. And I think that's the part where if you can try your best to resist that temptation and be honest to your own core principles, that gives you a chance of actually replicating the DNA over and over.
Yeah. So you said the head of product design is hire number 1. And we've heard, I don't know if this number is right, but 25% of your team is designers?
Yeah, in the beginning. I think it's a little bit less now, but for a while, it was like a quarter of our team was product designers, which I also don't think, is common maybe amongst startups. And for us, we cared a lot about, in many ways, AI companies are trying to invent new surface areas, new user experiences. I don't think that's possible without a really strong product design team. And, Zach, who's our head of design, he's been with us since the beginning. He's still with us today. And I honestly think, without him and being able to really deeply understand what the user is trying to accomplish, that matters so much, right? And we're glad we invested so much in that team. And I think for us, it's translated into hopefully a better just overall product experience.
Yeah. I guess on the design topic, there's this, I feel like it's overused now, but the concept of taste. People are like, hey, developer taste, researcher taste. But you could kind of think of design as the original arbiter of taste. Do you think there's a consistent sense of what good taste is at Gamma? And I ask that because there's an incredible diversity of what you can build on Gamma. And yet, when I use it, at least, there's sort of clear design choices that have been made that are automated that make my presentation look really beautiful. And so I'm curious, like, what does taste look like at Gamma and how do you balance those two sometimes conflicting principles?
Oh, yeah. It's a great question. I'd start by just saying, when people say taste, they oftentimes just think about only the visuals. It's like, what is like the visual output? I oftentimes, the analogy I have more is, if you think about like a restaurant, you go into a restaurant, the moment you go in, you're greeted, you're seated at, your table, you're handed the menu, you finally get, placed in your order, the food comes, it's good, and then you get your check. Like the end-to-end experience needs to be magical, right? If someone just came in and threw a plate down on your table and like, even if it looked good, like you probably wouldn't go back and tell your friends. And so taste is really thinking about that entire, experience. The moment you walk into the door, for us, the moment you log into our product to the moment you're actually sharing something with somebody else, your colleague, like we want that to feel great. And the set of user experiences, like the accumulation of all of that, we want that to feel like something where, again, it's a no-brainer for you to tell your friends about. Like, it's such a delightful experience. And I think that's really where, like, product designers come into play. It's like they deeply understand that entire, journey that a user is going on. And visuals are a big part of it. Like, certainly if the food doesn't look good or, like, tastes horrible, like, no one's going to come back regardless. But it's like, I'd say, like, only one part of, like, this bigger journey. Yeah. And so we think about a lot of that end-to-end. We don't want Gamma to be, I think, to the incumbent tools are much more like maybe I'm going to kill this sort of food analogy here, but or much more like a buffet. You go in and you figure out what you want to grab, throw it on your plate, go back and eat it. And that's the end of the day. We want to design the experience for you. And so we want that sort of experience to feel well-crafted so that you still have, as an end user, you choose what you want, but when you get what you order, it's going to be great. You're guaranteed it's going to be great. And so we're trying to move towards that vision where we can help curate a lot of it for you. we can make it feel effortless. And at the end of the day, hopefully it just feels delightful and magical. And that's really the ultimate goal we have in mind.
I guess going back to this point that you were making on hiring, Ben has this great quote from, I think 15 years ago that's aged really well. It's, if you haven't done the job yourself, how do you know what you're hiring for? And the reason I think it's aged well, but there's kind of been twists and turns along the way, is that there was probably a school of thought where it was like, hey, you have product market fit, immediately go hire the expert and help you just take that over, versus doing it yourself for a good bit of time. And I think, you've sort of gone on other on the record for saying there are jobs that you did in the early days for Gamma that maybe you didn't have experience doing.
Some of them I'm still doing today.
Exactly, founder mode. But maybe share a little bit more about your experience with this concept of do the job yourself before you hire for it.
Yeah, I'm fully aligned with what Ben said. And I think, going back to like hire painfully slowly, the pain part of it is pretty important. Like, where are you actually feeling the pain as an organization? And that's where you start looking for, okay, maybe we do need to hire somebody or like build out that function. For me, a lot of it early days was around marketing. I come from a finance background, operations. I had never done marketing. And so what does good marketing look like? I wanted to kind of appreciate the job before we went out and hired and built out a team. And so, in the beginning, when we started doing things like influencer marketing, I was onboarding every single influencer myself, right? I wanted to make sure, the influencers are going to be an extension of your team. They are essentially the equivalent of, a sales team if you're B2B. And so I needed to make sure that they could tell our story well. I wasn't going to be prescriptive in how they tell the story, but they needed to understand Gamma. I wanted to make sure they got like white gloves onboarding so that they could fully appreciate the product, so that they could tell our story in their voice in the most impactful way. And so those are things like I could have easily just hired somebody to build out the influencer marketing team because it was working already. But then I don't think I would have appreciated all the nuances, right? And even doing so, it allowed me to think about even being, become a creator myself, like actually posting more regularly on LinkedIn and Twitter. And then that you go into the sort of mindset of, okay, what does it mean to be a creator? Well, I need to learn how to be a better copywriter. And I need to learn, like, what's the difference between a good hook and a bad hook? What's a way to engage an audience? And like, those are all things that ends up becoming super important as you actually are scaling up a marketing function. And then when you're finally interviewing, people to join the marketing team, are they up-leveling you in some way? If they're not even as good as you and you basically just learned it yourself, then okay, well, that's probably not going to be a great fit.
Right.
But now that I've at least dabbled in it, I can ask better questions and I have a better understanding of what great looks like. I also know how hard it is to like overcome like the bar of mediocrity. Like, you can get stuck there and just be okay. Greatness takes a lot of work, many times, many years to get that. And so I think it just raised my bar of like, who do we even look for? And when it goes back to like when you're actually feeling the pain, you want to be able to put out that pain with like the very, very best option out there. And I think that's only possible when you actually start understanding it yourself.
Yeah, totally. Maybe to tie that back to your point on founder-led marketing, which I really loved, you are the star of one of the recent launch videos. I was like, wait, is this a paid actor? Oh no, it's Grant. You were amazing. And to your point on putting yourself out there, not just Gamma the company, but Grant as founder, co-founder, CEO. How did you think about the go direct process? And we think it's very powerful at A16Z when a founder can go out, bring your company and product to the forefront and connect it to the zeitgeist of what people actually care about and need and what their pain points are. But how did you decide on this journey? And, maybe for founders out there who are also thinking about, do I go direct? It's not natural to me.
Totally.
Usually there's layers of comms in between. What was that decision-making process for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different things driving this. One was just, we talk about internally one of our values around just, don't be boring. And so a lot of the content we put out there is just to have a little bit of fun and be playful. And I also think it's a responsibility for the founders to, really be the sort of steward of like, what is the brand, right? Like if you don't care about the brand, nobody else will. Nobody will ever care enough, as much about the brand as probably you do, because this is like you've created this from the ground up. And so for us, even as we get bigger, we like to have a little bit of fun. I think me being part of some of these videos just ensures that, what does the brand represent? It's really, we always think about brand and culture being two sides of the same coin. And so for us, we care a lot about our culture as well, and our culture is our team. And so being able to infuse some of that into the brand as well, the external representation, I think has just been energizing. And personally for me, working with our creative team, it really does energize me. Like they're just so creative and they dream up things that I could never do on my own. And to be able to play even just a small role of it, I'm going to be a cameo or an actor, whatever they want me to do, I'll do it. And I think, hopefully we can preserve that for a long time. But that's part of, I think, what makes our team special.
Well, we thought we'd end on a fun question. And it's sort of this theme of Gamma-ramas, which we didn't even, the first time we heard that, we should call it that internally. But this is actually going to be a question for all of us, so we all have to answer this. But what was the last Gamma that you made? Or pick an interesting one. And how do you personally use Gamma?
Yeah, well, that's a great one. Oh, for an upcoming Gamma-rama, one of the topics I was thinking about, I think there's a lot of talk around like the longevity movement right now. And so I did want to kind of demystify some of that, and also just like what are the common themes around like, what are people saying that are important? I think definitely as I get older, I have 2 young kids, just even trying to keep up with them just means I have to, invest in things like just being healthier and, physical activity, all that stuff matters a ton. So I'm going to try to put something together there. And I think it's kind of a fun topic.
Totally. I have a slightly more boring topic. I actually have 2. I'm going to cheat a little. I have 2 use cases that I love Gamma for. One of them is, as VCs do, like we'll go deep into a space for months and kind of form a thesis around it. So like voice agents is a space I spend a lot of time in. And so I'll kind of publish a very long Gamma, like, dozens of slides. And I think what I really like about using Gamma for those is the analytics. Well, first, the ease of publication. Like it's so easy to open and check out. I can put it in my Twitter bio. Like that's very easy. But then I can actually click in and see like what part of this extremely long thesis are people engaging with. Totally. Like what should I write more about? What should I publish more about?
It's a great signal.
Other end of the spectrum, much smaller audience. I use Gammas a lot for when we're actually trying to talk to other startups and share why we're excited about them, what we've learned about them, all of that. And for that, going back to the 16:9 insight, I think the flexible size of the slides and the fact that you can almost package and send something that feels more structured in a good way than a website, but feels as kind of content rich is like very, very special.
Super cool.
I use it for some of those same use cases, so I won't mention those, but maybe a personal one. I do an annual retreat with my best friends from college, and we have an agenda for this retreat because we're total nerds. And this year we put it in Gamma, and this is kind of our ongoing tradition of, here are the cards, here are the agenda topics for, motherhood, career, etc. And it's so interesting because you can kind of see it when you use it for personal reasons, the tie to work and like how this is just sort of the ideal way of putting ideas into reality. So
we had a user create a graduation like scrapbook, like as a gift for the one of their family members, and it was really cute. Like there's so many pictures. It was one that got shared across generations, like grandparents, parents, kids, and it feels like it's pretty special to be part of some of those moments too, even if they're not core business use cases. But the fact that they chose Gamma for like a pretty special moment and something that's going to live on and like shared across the family, it was definitely a fun one to see.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Grant. This was such a fun conversation, and we're thrilled to have you here.
Thank you so much. It was great.